Hello, everybody, and happy 4th of July. This is my contribution to the second discussion, do you speak American? So the first question was whether or not I was happy with my language and linguistic tone. And I hadn't really ever thought about that before, so I guess by definition I'm okay with it. It does always sound weird to me when I hear my own voice in a recording, and I think that's pretty common for everybody. We never sound like we think we sound. Moving on to the next question. Again, I'm not really sure what's meant by is my language or dialect valued in my culture, but I think it's considered normal. I speak apparently Midland English since I'm from the Midwest. And I'd always been told growing up that, oh yeah, the way we speak is good for radio announcing and television. And that was confirmed in the video that it's considered the most normal or unaccented English. I never really wished for anything different, but now I think about it, there are certain people, they have a very warm tone, and when they talk to you, you immediately are put at ease, and I would like to be able to do that. And then, of course, maybe less cursing too, because I curse a lot, and I probably shouldn't. Which brings me to the next thing, the cultural and community differences. I think the thing that probably affected my language the most in those categories would be working in an industry that had its own jargon. I worked in printing for over 40 years, and there's a whole lot of words and jargon there that aren't used anywhere else. It was also a very male-dominated industry, or at least in the end of it that I was in, which was running printing presses. So there was often very frank and sometimes crude descriptions of things. There was an economy of vocabulary, I guess is a good way to say it. There were also, idioms, and that's another part that I think is influenced by culture. Growing up in the Midwest, a lot of the idioms I still use are from the farmland and stuff that I grew up with, hearing my father say or other adults say, different comparisons. I try not to use idioms a lot in multicultural situations because I think I've seen people do it and it just confuses people. If you're not from wherever that idiom is from, then you're just going to be confused by it. So yeah, I guess there are some word choice and speech patterns that have been influenced both by my growing up in the Midwest and also by being in factories for 40 years. So part two, the scenes that stood out for me, the big one was the Oxford English Dictionary editor and the Yugoslav guy. They had their diametrically opposed viewpoints about where English language was going. I think they called it prescriptive versus descriptive. And it was really interesting to me that the OED guy was going through those lurid magazines looking for new usages of English words. Another scene that was really interesting was the experiment on the train where the linguist was going around to different passengers on the train and showing them a map and asking them to show where the different language groups were in the U.S. And the way that was almost universal that New York and the South were considered the most incorrect usage of English. And then really fascinating, toward the end there was a clip about Sierra Leone and how Pidgin English evolved, from the slave traders going up the river, and also from the slaves who were kept in different language groups so they couldn't, figure out how to escape or whatever, develop their own Pidgin as well. And then how that is still used not only there upriver in Sierra Leone, but also it's evident in the coast of South Carolina with the Gullah language. I thought that was really interesting. it's a really good question about how we treat one another, how it's affected by the language we use, because the language used also kind of affects how we see the world. But I think the point of the video was that we're influenced by dialect, and we form opinions about what's right based on the dialect we hear. The best example was at Ann Arbor Martin Luther King school, where African American kids couldn't get a decent education because people heard the dialect and just figured that there was no way they would be able to learn anything. The second one was that our identity is bound up in our shared dialect, and that was when they talked about Pittsburgh. It was like that, is if you share a dialect, then you can quickly decide who belongs and who doesn't belong. So that's kind of affects how we treat each other too. If people don't speak like we do, then we tend to put them in a different bucket or put them in a different group. So interesting but long video, and it was really, really old. But that's that, and I'll see you next week.